as my beautiful home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is...
While Wisconsin families and seniors struggle to pay bills, the only one in Washington standing up to those responsible.
And an unlucky few are even forced to move in with their parents.
And here's the thing, it'll give us so much extra space in our room to do activities. Please say yes.
You don't need permission from us to build bunk beds. You're adults. You can do what you want.
So...
No adult wants to shack up in the parents' basement. It's the ultimate sign of failure.
Bald men with no jobs and no money who live with their parents don't approach strange women.
Unless you're the child of Washington royalty, where mooching off mom and dad is a way of life. You get to fly to the most exotic countries in the world, play diplomat, and count the money. We told you about Hunter's escapades, from being bribed with Chinese diamonds to funding a Russian sex trafficking ring. But we just found out Hunter has some competition. His name, Paul Pelosi Jr. As far as we can tell, he's never had a real job, the kind where you have to punch a clock. So what does Paulie Jr. do all day? Well, last week, Nancy snuck little Paulie on her plane to Asia. His name wasn't listed as part of the official delegation. They didn't want you to know Paul went to Asia with his mom. But if you look closely at the photos, there he is. Paulie P. Jr., about as unqualified as Hunter, with all the big dogs there in Asia. He was also caught by foreign photographers in Singapore and Japan. The U.S. press, who covered every move Nancy made in the Pacific, somehow never noticed that her son Paul was along for the ride. He was even wearing the same purple tie he wore when he went to Ukraine. Oh, you didn't know he went to Ukraine? Well, yeah, we didn't either. You won't find any trace of this on the speaker's website because she didn't want you to know about Paulie Jr. What was her son doing there? He's not an elected official. He's not an advisor to Nancy. He doesn't even live in Washington. But he was greeted as royalty by the president of Taiwan. Watch.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Chairman Meeks, Chairman Takano, Vice Chairperson Del Bene, Chairman Krishnamurti, Congressman Kim, Director Alkirk, Mr. Pelosi, dear guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Well, we know Mr. Pelosi doesn't refer to Paul Pelosi Sr. because he had a prior obligation last week, as we've been reporting. Now, if you check the speaker's website, you could read the official transcript from that event that we just played for you. But Pelosi's office edited the part out of the transcript where they mentioned Mr. Pelosi. Isn't Nancy proud of her son? Well, maybe not. Back home in California, Paulie has a bit of a reputation. They call him the Fresh Prince of San Fran. And if you thought Hunter Biden's business deals were shady, just wait. Paulie Jr. is on the payroll of 2 lithium mining companies. And Asia just happens to be a lithium gold mine. And Taiwan just happens to be a world leader in lithium battery production. He's also heavily invested in Singapore's energy sector. Wasn't that another stop on Nancy's trip? Oh, it was. And that sure looks like him right there. We've been calling and emailing the speaker's office all day to confirm this. They won't pick up the phone or write back. But we need to know because these are valid questions. South Korea is another place where the Fresh Prince does business. Just a few months ago, his company struck up an EV battery deal there. What do you know? Nancy went to South Korea also. We didn't get any pictures of Paulie there, but maybe he took a quick trip himself to China alone. I mean, his mother's always been very interested in that country. Just like Papa Paulie, Prince Pelosi will go wherever the money is. I mean, where his mother is. And he has a history of screwing people, just not in the same way Hunter does. 5 separate federal investigations are circling Pelosi Jr.'s companies. Paul Pelosi was allegedly, quote, hired by several firms that were subject to both federal and state probes, and meanwhile has connections to a host of fraudsters, rule breakers, and convicted criminals. Nancy Pelosi talks a great game about protecting seniors, but not the prince. One of his companies is being investigated for scamming sick and gullible elderly people out of their money. Doesn't stop there. Pelosi's investment company, which the SEC said was run by convicted fraudsters, got tangled up in a slew of scandals, including a massive crypto scam. Classy. The feds even probed Paulie Jr. for bribing San Francisco city inspectors looking into his girlfriend's flophouse. The Fresh Prince tried to pay them off by cutting a check for the rugby team. But the prince always skates, doesn't he? Maybe that has something to do with Nancy stacking the deck with cronies at the SEC, or the fact that the FBI only has eyes for Trump. By the way, his former girlfriend, Karina Feng, who was born in Taiwan of all places, sued the prince, alleging he stole from her and even threatened her. Is Paul Pelosi Jr. really just Hunter Biden without the crack pipe? We don't know. We're just asking questions. But where have we heard this story before? Well, if you're one of the 5 families, you get to fly around on government planes, take taxpayer-funded trips, meet and greet foreign leaders, and have dinners overseas with executives eager to do business with rich American political families. These politicians are supposed to be doing business for you, not their families. And we keep catching them red-handed. Joe Biden just lies about it and says, I don't know anything and nothing ever happened. And Nancy Pelosi's office is just hiding it. There are pictures of Paul Jr. all over Asia, and they're trying to scrub the evidence of it. I mean, and this is just on the heels of major insider trading allegations with Paul Sr. And now the son's sneaking around and sniffing out deals in the Far East on your dime, literally a week later. And the American Press Corps, they don't care. Looks like they're in on the cover-up. Peter Schweitzer, author of Red-Handed, How American Elites Get Rich Helping China Win, and president of the Government Accountability Institute, joins me now. So this is pretty shocking. Not only did he fly over there on the heels of this insider trading allegation with the dad, and they're trying to hide all evidence of it. They're scrubbing transcripts. There's no pictures from the American press.
Ron Johnson supported banning abortion. The Supreme Court overturned Roe, ending legal abortions in Wisconsin, even in cases
a fighter and a dreamer and full-time.
What the heck's going on here, Peter?
Yeah, Jesse, this is a particularly cynical and galling move by the Pelosis. First of all, as you pointed out, Paul Pelosi Sr., Nancy's husband, has been under scrutiny for insider trading issues, the stock trades. He has to, of course, disclose his finances because he's the spouse of Nancy Pelosi. Your adult children do not need to disclose their financial transactions. So it seems like they've switched attention to their son's commercial activities. But to put even a tighter note on it, Jesse, look at what's happening here. Nancy Pelosi is flying to the Asia-Pacific region as the entire region is nervous and scared about the looming threat posed by China. And you've got the Speaker of the House coming in with a couple of other Democrats. They certainly want to have her good favor. And here all of a sudden her son is along for the trip. He's not a foreign policy advisor. He has no background, looking for business deals. This is what you call leverage. This is the sort of stuff you'd expect from the mafia, where you kind of create a demand for your own services. And the kind of services that Paul Pelosi Jr. is offering are very reminiscent of Hunter Biden's, by the way. They're vague. They're consulting. They're offering advisory services. They don't actually have some product that they're trying to sell. So it's a particularly galling and cynical move. And I applaud you for covering this because the rest of the mainstream media is totally ignoring this story.
Why do you think they are ignoring this story? Because as we said at the outset, that she had a gaggle of American reporters, photographers, cameramen, print people along for the ride. And they saw her and reported on her taking her little shopping trips, walking through everywhere, shaking hands with all of these Asian leaders. And Paul's right there. The son's right there.
Yeah.
I mean, so they knew the son was on the trip, but they purposely hid that from the American public. What does that tell you?
Well, I mean, the most hospitable thing you could say is this is a somewhat complicated story, and maybe they're lazy, but it's not that complicated, Jesse. The bottom line is most of the establishment media, the vast majority, they want access. The same reason that we started covering Hunter Biden in 2018. The fact that he went on Air Force Two with his father to Beijing, China to close deals with the Chinese government. The media didn't want to cover it because they want access to Nancy Pelosi and guys like Joe Biden. And then, of course, there is, let's be blunt about it, the ideological bias. You've got people in the mainstream media that believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat to the American Republic. And anything we do to report honestly or fairly on his political opponents is somehow aiding and abetting him, and we can't have that, so they put their thumb on the scale. That's not their job. It's the job of voters to decide who their leaders are. It should be the job and the role of the media to report the facts, and the facts here are clear-cut. If Donald Trump Jr. had traveled with his father conducting business deals overseas on Air Force One, we certainly would have heard about it, as we should hear about it, but we're not going to hear about it with Nancy Pelosi because they have their thumbs on the scale.
All right, Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jesse.
We have a breaking Fox News alert. The FBI has raided former President Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago.